When I was 16, I was a waitress. And I remember working in a restaurant, and we had these regular customers come in, and they always wanted to sit in my section. And they told me the reason they wanted to sit in my section was because I smiled a lot. And I thought, wow, if they only knew the pain behind this smile, the pain of being separated from my parents, from my sister, from my brother, and how I was just trying to get through every day. Grief wears many faces. I'd like you just for a moment to take a second to think about someone in your life who's important to you, who may no longer be here. They might have died. You might have had a divorce, or you might be separated for another reason. Think about the pain or the anguish that it felt knowing they're not here. And maybe somebody acknowledged it. Maybe someone said something like, "I'm sorry," or "I don't really know what to say." Or it's quite possible that no one acknowledged the pain in the way you most need it. Every year, more than 250,000 children enter the foster care system. And I've been entrusted today to represent the voices of children who've experienced loss, grief, trauma as a result of being removed from their families. And when I say foster care, I just want to be clear because different jurisdictions use different terms. I'm referring to any placement where a child is after they're removed from their families. That could be a foster home. It could be a group home, a children's home, an adoptive home. What I'm sharing with you today is based on more than 15 years of research, listening to children, teens, young adults in the foster care system about their experiences. These are their experiences, their stories. Ambiguity is a big thing. And I'm going to spend a bit of time today talking about that and grief and others. But before I do, I want you to hear what it feels like when children are separated from their families. Here's what they want you to know. It was a horrible, traumatizing experience for all of us. I didn't want to be ripped away from my family and not be able to have any contact with them. I was only 12 years old. I shouldn't have known that kind of pain at that age. I felt like my life was taken away. To be completely honest with you, really, it was one of the worst experiences in my life. It was terrible. I lost my strength. I lost my life. I lost myself. It was hell, man. It's like having your heart ripped out of your chest. It pains me to hear these words because we're not paying attention to what we really need to be thinking about, which is how children are impacted when they are removed from their families. And when they're removed from their families, they experience tons of ambiguity because they experience things like placement reason ambiguity, placement context ambiguity, temporal ambiguity, and I can go on. And more than 50% of these young people are placed with complete strangers. And some people call this stranger foster care. I call it relationship ambiguity. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that they're experiencing this grief and they're with people they don't know. This is problematic. Why do we need to care about loss? We need to care about loss because it's critical to understanding what our children are going through. And someone might say, well, if we're trauma-informed, right, then we got this. And my answer is no. Being trauma-informed is very different than being grief-informed. There's overlap, but they're not one and the same. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Before I go into that, I want to talk about what children have to say when they experience loss, when they're asked about it. It made me angry that I couldn't see my siblings. I got in a lot of fights. I ended up in a treatment facility. I acted out in a verbal and physical way. I felt lonely. My sister was my everything. She held me together. When she got separated from me, they took away the part of me that was the hope I had. I felt like no one acknowledged my loss and hurt. It made me feel terrible because I felt like I had no stand. I felt like nobody took great concern to understand what I was going through, or honestly, what any kid in foster care was going through. Here is where we're failing. Children are telling us that we need to be paying attention to the separation from their families, and we're not quite getting it. And here's a bigger issue. Being in foster care automatically puts children at a higher risk than children in the general population. Now let's add being a grieving or bereaved child. Now we're doubling the risk. We're doubling the risk for depression, for high-risk behaviors, for suicide. And we all know, hopefully we all know what's going on in this country with adolescent suicide. So yes, we need to pay attention to grief. I remember when I was teaching a graduate course at the university, and it was on grief and loss, and it was one of the only graduate courses at the university, and I had a number of students say to me, I can't wait to graduate because I'm going to go into the field of thanatology. And I said, great, are you going to take the grief and loss course? They said, no. I said, what do you mean, no? Well, I'm trauma informed. I got this. I said, no, not quite. And here's the thing, being trauma informed is super critical. But we all need to be grief informed because loss is inevitable. And we want to prevent loss when we can, but when we cannot, if we don't acknowledge that loss, we're going to promote further trauma. When kids talk to me and teenagers talk to me, or the research teams that I've worked with, they said that siblings are like their lifeline. And if you disconnect them from their lifeline, it is like cutting them off from their oxygen supply. Can you imagine? And so they act out. And then sometimes adults say, oh, they're acting out, we better take them to a psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist diagnoses them with some pathology, when grief is a normal and natural response to loss. We're not getting it right. I want you to think back to that person you thought of earlier. I imagine you care deeply for this person, perhaps love them. Did that love go away? Probably not. And so think about these children where less than 1% enter foster care because of a death. Their people are out there somewhere, and they know that. And so they might be thinking, how am I going to get back to them? Well, maybe if I act out, or maybe if I do this or do that, maybe you'll send me back. We're not getting it. We're misreading our children. And we have an opportunity here, an opportunity to either promote further trauma or prevent it. And I think we're all in agreement we want to prevent it. Let's listen a little more. I thought when I first went into foster care that I wouldn't be able to see my parents ever again. Even though my parents weren't being right with me, it doesn't mean I don't like them. It kind of feels like prison if you don't get to see them. A lot of these so-called treatments consist of suppressing what comes natural to us. If you suppress something for so long, it's not going to go away. It's going to wait, and it's going to come back with a vengeance. I moved to 3 different foster homes in a short amount of time. Once I got to my last one is when I felt like they actually acknowledged what I was going through. I feel like unless you're in this situation, you'll never really understand. Clearly, this is a call to action. Our children are asking us. They're pleading with us. Do not separate me from my family unless it is absolutely imperative to do so. And listen, really listen to what I have to say. And don't judge my behaviors. Get to the heart of the matter. I'm in pain. I'm suffering. I'm grieving. As a society, we need to do better. We need to not only be trauma-informed, we need to be grief-informed. We need to keep our families together, and when we cannot, we need to make sure that all public officials understand what being trauma-informed and grief-informed means with their removal practices. We focus on the trauma that occurs for children before they enter foster care, and we focus on the trauma that occurs for children after they're in foster care, if that happens. But we are not necessarily recognizing that removal in and of itself is and can be a traumatizing experience. We need healthier interventions. Our children are over-medicated. They are over-medicated and they're sick of it, and frankly, we should all be sick of it. We need to do something different because medication will not get to the heart of the problem. Human connection will. And after listening to these young people for years, I realized something needs to happen differently. And at the Doughy Center, we've now developed a new intervention. It is a peer grief support group led by young people in the foster care system. It is for young people in the foster care system, and it's an alternative. And as we roll it out in South Carolina, preliminary findings show that this intervention, the LIGHT program, is not only desired by the young people, it's needed. We need to do things in new ways. We need to listen, and we need to be the change they're asking us to be. Children should be kept with their families. Family separation is a national crisis. And the good news is that our legal system, our judges and our attorneys have the opportunity to fix this. We can do better. And I say we because we are all in this together. We can do better. We need to do better. No child should know this type of pain. Thank you for listening.